All right guys, Justin here, and we're on another winter backpacking trip. On this trip, I'm gonna go over 7 essential things that you should do on winter trips in order to have fun and stay safe. And these aren't your typical 3-season tips. We're going beyond that. We're not gonna be talking about bringing enough food, making sure you leave an itinerary with someone. These are winter specific tips that if you don't follow them, then you're probably gonna have a terrible time and maybe even end up in a life or death situation, especially as it relates to the last tip we're gonna talk about. We're in Banff National Park at Lake Minnewanka. We're gonna be hiking right along the shoreline there, about 8 kilometers, and end up at one of my favorite campgrounds in all of Banff. The first thing we're going to talk about is to start small. Doesn't matter how much experience you have summer backpacking or camping, the consequences are much greater in the wintertime and the likelihood of something going wrong are much higher, making it a much riskier time of year to be going outside and backpacking or camping. And because of that, I recommend not just picking your favorite summer trail and heading out on a trip. I'd start in your backyard or car camping, get used to winter conditions, and then once you're comfortable, go on a small, short trip, something 1 or 2 miles into a campground that's established. As well, start small with weather. Don't be going out when there's a huge blizzard, tons of snow, and freezing cold temperatures. Start when it's a little bit warmer, a little bit less snow, and then slowly work your way up to those longer trips and trips with more extreme conditions. The trip I'm on right now is actually a perfect, easy to moderate trip. Beautiful weather. I checked the weather. It's supposed to be a gorgeous weekend, sunny, warm, just around freezing during the day, and then going down to minus 15 degrees Celsius at night. And then the campground I'm going to is only 8 kilometers in, so nice and short, and then has a lot of facilities like firewood, fire pits, outhouses, that kind of thing. So really nice trip, and one of my favorite campgrounds. The views are spectacular. You're right by the lake. So we're gonna keep hiking because I'm really excited to get to that awesome campground. Maybe throw in one more tip before we get there. The second essential thing that you must do when winter backpacking or camping is probably a contender for one of the most important things, and that's being aware of the weather and the conditions that you're going out in. It's not enough to check your typical weather app, see what the weather's gonna be for that day. You gotta get into detail, look at the hourly forecast, specifically what the temperature is going to be at night, because that's when it's going to get coldest, and that's when you're going to have to make sure that your sleep system is up to snuff in order to keep you warm and safe when you're out there. As well, you want to be checking wind to make sure that it's not going to be super windy, not going to be blowing your tent down, as well as cooling you off when you're hiking or at camp. As well, you want to be aware of the snow conditions. Is there a lot of snow on the ground right now? Are you going to need snowshoes or skis? And is there snow in the forecast that might make it very difficult for your tent to stay up if it gets loaded with 2 feet of snow, or for you to get back down the trail back to your car at the end of your trip if a whole bunch of snow has fell? Weather is super important, and there's been a lot of cases in the Canadian Rockies where I am where people underestimate the weather or forget that the weather can impede rescue efforts, and they end up getting stranded on the mountain, and in some cases they end up dying. And we want to avoid that, and there's a couple ways in order to keep up to date on weather. My favorite tool for checking the weather is spotwx.com. So it allows you to really pinpoint a location and check the weather for that location, and it takes elevation into account as well, compared to some of the other mainstream apps like the Weather Network or weather.com, where it'll probably pull from the closest city and not give you as accurate of a forecast. Elevation is a big factor because you might end up with more snow, colder conditions, and that can really affect your planning. So weather, pay attention to it. We're gonna keep hiking down here. It's starting to get really windy, which the forecast predicted, so that's good. It also predicted this beautiful weather, but I'm really excited to get to the campground, and once we're there, I'm gonna give you a couple more tips that are specific to the camping aspect of backpacking. So we've arrived. Let's go take a look around, and I'll show you why this is one of my favorite campgrounds. While a lot of the forest around here is coniferous, this campground is nestled in this really pretty aspen forest on a peninsula that juts out into the lake. And then it has these beautiful lakeside communal fire pit areas that you just sit around here and enjoy the view. Then on a hot day, you can come down to the beach, work on your tan, have a beer. It's a nice spot. I'm gonna go get camp set up back in the forest here, a little bit sheltered from the wind. Then we're gonna keep going with the must-dos for winter camping with buffers. So I got camp all set up. The first thing I like to do when I get to camp is put my tent up, get my sleep system all set up. I like to get my sleeping bag out of the compression sack right away and lofting up, so that by the time I go to bed, it's fully lofted and I'm gonna get a nice warm sleep with it. So I promised we'd talk about buffers. That's the third must-do thing when winter camping. We went through how to start small, checking the weather, and you might be thinking, all right, I'm all set. It's gonna be -10 overnight. I'll bring my -10 sleeping bag and I'll be ready to go. But hold up a second, that's where buffers come into play. You wanna make sure that you're bringing gear that's not necessarily ready for the conditions that you expect, but the worst case scenario. So right now it's supposed to get down to -15 degrees Celsius on the trip that I'm going on right now. And I brought my sleeping bag that I know can get down to -25 degrees Celsius. And that's just in case the forecast is wrong, very likely, or it gets windy, or there's some other factor that may make it so that I need that extra buffer in my sleep system. And buffers come into play in a whole bunch of different ways. Another way that you wanna make sure that you're leaving yourself buffers is with the length of your trip. You move a lot slower in wintertime, whether that's because you have a lot more gear on your back or because there's deep snow that's hard to walk through. You're not gonna be able to make the same kind of distance in the same amount of time that you would in the summertime. So you wanna leave yourself buffers. As well, the sun sets a lot sooner. So instead of being able to hike until 7, 8 p.m. at night, you can only hike until 5:30, 6 o'clock in the middle of winter before the sun goes down, depending on where you are in the world. But where I am in Canada, the sun sets really early. So I made myself a little wind fort here of the benches. I'm gonna chop some wood, get this fire going, and then I'll have a nice warm place to hang out for the rest of the evening. As well, there's a few things I want to talk about with you that relate to those temperatures dropping and essential things you need to do when it's cold out. Like I said, it's gonna get cold really quickly, and because of that, you need to be very careful with essential things like water that they don't freeze. So there's a few different things that I do. First of all, I have an Nalgene that I keep in this insulated sleeve here. So I keep this on the outside of my pack and it stays nice and watery. It doesn't freeze even when it gets really cold out. The other thing that I do is the water that I drink throughout the day is kept inside my jacket here. So I have a pocket inside the jacket where I keep a Platypus soft water bottle. So I keep that in there and it does a really good job of keeping the water from freezing. The other aspect is filtering water. So you can see behind me, I have access to flowing water. In the wintertime, that may or may not be the case, but when it is the case, I like to bring my filter with me and filter water. And if you are bringing a filter, then you need to keep that warm. So I keep that in the pocket on the other side here. I have my bee-free water filter, and I keep this on me at all times, no matter what. If I'm hiking, if I'm at camp, this is in my jacket staying warm. And then when I go to bed, I keep all of my water and my filter inside my sleeping bag with me so it doesn't freeze overnight. So that's 4 must-dos down, 3 more to go. The next 3 are some of the more important ones. The next one we're gonna talk about has to do with cooking and some of the other gear items while you're camping. So we're gonna get to camp, get some of that stuff going, and then talk about that 5th item. Next thing I want to talk about is making sure that you have redundancy with your essential items. So there's a few things that I think are essential when you're winter camping. First up is your sleep system. That's what's going to keep you alive and warm at night. Then the other one is being able to make fire, get heat, and warm things up. So to address that second one, I bring 2 lighters as a redundancy. So I bring a big lighter and then a small lighter. The big lighter just I find works a little bit better in wintertime. And then I also bring 2 stoves. So little BRS 3000 stove and then my Pocket Rocket Deluxe on this trip. But the main thing for me is double lighters. Even in the summertime, I'll bring double lighters, but I think it's even more essential in the wintertime. And then as far as my sleeping system goes, I bring a Thermarest X-Therm as my sleeping pad. And then for the redundancy, I have a Decathlon sleeping mat that I put underneath the Thermarest. That way I get a little bit of extra warmth, and then if the Thermarest fails at all, I still have insulation on the ground and I'm not gonna freeze, hopefully. Speaking of camp clothes, I'm gonna go get changed in them. I'm still in my hiking clothes. I like to get changed into my camp clothes once I'm kind of done with the camp chores, because sometimes I get a little bit sweaty when I'm doing the camp chores. I don't wanna get my camp clothes all sweaty. And that has to do with something that we'll talk about tomorrow after I get a good night's sleep, and that has to do with moisture management. What I think is the most important thing with winter camping, especially if you're doing multi-day trips or the conditions are very extreme, and I have some tips and tricks and must-dos in order to avoid moisture, because if you get moisture into your gear, then you can end up in really big trouble really quick. Really glad I made this wind barrier. When you're out there in the wind, it is cold. But now that I've changed my camp clothes, I got my down pants, expedition booties on, big Decathlon puffy jacket, I'm about to make dinner. Gonna have good to go herbed mushroom risotto. So we'll see how this tastes. Gonna cook it up on my Pocket Rocket Deluxe with my Evernew titanium pasta pot there. As usual with winter camping, after I eat, I'll be pretty quick to bed, have a nice good sleep, probably get 12 hours of sleep as usual. And then tomorrow we're gonna hit the ground running. We're gonna get into some really good essential must-dos for winter camping. Good morning. I slept great last night. Another great 12 hours of winter camping sleep. It was super windy last night. My tent was shaking in the wind really aggressively. I was sleeping in the Nemo Tenshi tent and I had it guide out and it just held up like a champ. Got to experience a great sunrise. I've already eaten breakfast and got a lot of the packing done. But before I finish packing and we hit the trail, I just want to touch on another winter camping must-do, and that's leave no trace. Leave no trace is an important thing no matter what time of year you're camping, but there's some specific winter camping things I want to talk about. First up is pooping. So this campground has outhouse just over that way, so I'm going to use that for my morning business. But if you're random camping and you need to go number 2, don't just be going on the snow and then just kind of burying it in the snow. That poo is not gonna decompose over the course of the winter. It's basically just gonna get carried into any streams or water bodies come spring runoff, and that's what you're then gonna be drinking. So definitely not a good thing to be doing. If you do need to poop in the winter, what you should be doing is bringing a wag bag with you. So these are bags that you poop into and then you carry that off the trail with you. So the other leave no trace items have to do with fire. I don't really make fires that often in the summertime unless I'm in a big group and we're socializing well into the night. But in the wintertime, I find a fire comforting as well because the nights are really long. I like having a fire just to sit around, so I'm not just having to get in my sleeping bag right away. The fire can help keep me a little bit warmer. And with fire comes having to get wood. Try and keep the amount of wood that you need very minimal. Be efficient with your fires and make sure you're getting dead wood. I see live trees cut all the time and that's just not cool. You want to be making sure that the tree is dead. Not only is it better for the environment, but it's also better because your wood's gonna burn better. I'm gonna finish packing, then we're gonna hit the trail and we're gonna talk about the final must-do thing when winter camping and what I think is the most important one, because if you don't do this, then you're gonna have a terrible time and it really could be one of those things that leads to a life or death situation. We're back on the trail. That was a nice little overnighter. It's time to talk about the final must-do item for winter camping, and that's moisture management. One of the most important things, and maybe one of the most underrated things. And there's a few different ways I think you can specifically apply it to your trips. The first one being the clothing that you're wearing when you're hiking. I'm not gonna go into the specifics of my hiking clothing in this video, but generally I wear very quick drying materials. So polyester is probably the most quick drying material out there, followed by nylon. Cotton and merino wool, they hold on to a ton of moisture. If you end up hiking in cotton or merino wool, you could be holding on to a ton of moisture. Not only will that cool you off a lot when you're hiking, but then the next day you could run into problems when you try to go and put on your hiking clothes in the morning and get on the trail and you find that all your clothes are frozen solid. In the same kind of vein as clothing is footwear. So I use a vapor barrier between my sock and my boot, and that can be anything from a bread bag to a dedicated vapor barrier. I use one made by Rab. What that does is it prevents the sweat and moisture from your foot from getting into your boot. My feet sweat a lot, regardless of what the temperature is outside. My feet are sweating, and if I don't use a vapor barrier, all that moisture and sweat is getting right into my boot, and then that's gonna freeze overnight, or I'm gonna have to dry them by the fire, and it's a big pain. I used a vapor barrier yesterday and left my boots outside overnight, all night, and they were not frozen at all, nice and soft this morning. And then once I get to camp, I'll leave my hiking clothes on until I'm done all my camp chores. There's a chance I'll get pretty sweaty when I'm doing those camp chores, so I don't want to be getting that sweat into my camp clothes. That's not an exhaustive list of all the must-dos for winter camping, but I think it's some of the most important ones. If you're gonna listen to any of them, it's definitely that first one. Start small, work your way up to more advanced trips as you build your experience and skills, and just have fun out there. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.